The music feels almost too elegant for what is coming through here, because this energy is not calm. It looks calm, that is the difference. And the first card you gave me is the Nine of Pentacles reversed, which is interesting because I'm not using this as fortune telling. I'm reading the card symbolically, psychologically. And upside down, this image immediately feels like somebody whose normal self-sufficiency has stopped working. This person is used to being composed, used to being the one who does not need anybody, used to having a life that looks complete from the outside, responsibilities handled, money handled, reputation handled, people respecting him, people assuming he knows exactly what he is doing. But then there is you, and I actually had to sit with this for a second because the message did not come through like a romantic letter. It came through like somebody arguing with himself in a room where nobody else is supposed to hear him. And the weirdest part is, he keeps losing the argument. Okay, let me read this the way it came through. I thought distance would fix this. That was the first thing I tried. I thought if I stayed busy long enough, if I gave my attention to work, travel, obligations, other conversations, other people, eventually you would become less vivid. I have done this before. I know how to remove myself emotionally when something becomes inconvenient. But you did not become less vivid. You became clearer. So I tried another scenario. I told myself I only wanted you because I could not completely have you. I told myself this was ego, curiosity, timing, chemistry, something temporary. That explanation lasted maybe 3 days. Then I imagined you choosing somebody else. Wait. That is where the energy changes, because this is not jealousy in the childish sense. It is more like reality suddenly becoming unacceptable to him. I can picture myself succeeding without you. I can picture myself travelling without you. I can picture another person beside me. I can even picture myself smiling, but every version looks staged. That is what scares me. I have spent years building a life where I do not have to beg anything to stay. So why does the thought of losing you make everything I built feel strangely unfinished? And that admission seems to bother him more than missing you, because he cannot explain it. And justice is sitting here now, which... okay. That actually explains why this is bothering him so much, because symbolically, justice is not really about emotion, it is about evidence, cause and effect. Looking at something without changing the facts just because you dislike the conclusion. And I think that is what he has been doing. He keeps putting this connection on trial. I said it was ego. Fine. Then why did the feeling remain when nobody was watching? I said it was attraction. Then why did being around attractive people not solve it? I said it was loneliness. But I have been alone before. I know what loneliness feels like. I said it was bad timing, scarcity, unfinished business. The fact that I could not completely control what happened between us. Every explanation makes sense for a minute, and then something happens that does not fit. Okay, this is interesting, because I do not think the problem is that he sits around thinking about you every second. That would actually be easier for him to dismiss. It is subtler than that. He goes somewhere impressive, and some part of him notices how you would have reacted to it. He has a conversation with somebody, and without meaning to, he notices what is missing from the conversation. Something good happens, something he ordinarily would have considered enough, and there is this almost irritating little comparison happening underneath it. Not, I wish you were here. More like, this does not feel the way I expected it to feel. And that is much harder to argue with, because now you are not simply a person he remembers. You have become a reference point. That is different. Justice, psychologically, feels like him being forced to compare what he tells himself with what his actual behaviour keeps revealing. And the evidence is becoming inconvenient, because every time he says, I am over this, something in his life quietly answers, then why are you still measuring everything against it? Wait, I think this is why that word unfinished came through. It is not necessarily that his life is empty without you. I do not get that. His life can be full. That is almost the problem, because apparently a full calendar, a successful week, attention, movement, accomplishment, none of it has produced the emotional reset he expected. So he tried something more deliberate. He thought, fine, maybe I just need proof that this feeling is replaceable. And I really want to stay with this next part, because the scenario he chose was supposed to settle the argument completely. Instead, I think it scared him more than anything else he had tried, because the Nine of Wands is here now. And, look at what this card is doing symbolically. It is guarded, watching. Almost like somebody who has been through enough that he has learned to keep part of himself behind a fence, even when nothing is technically wrong. So, the replacement test was not reckless. It was actually very controlled. I thought maybe I needed to stop romanticising this and look at what would make sense on paper. Someone accomplished, someone attractive, someone who understands my lifestyle, someone who would fit easily into the things I already have planned, and there are people who could do that. That is important. This is not him looking around and deciding nobody else is good enough. That would be too simple. Some of these alternatives probably make more sense, less complicated, more available, easier to explain. The kind of connection where he could already predict where everything would go. And apparently that was supposed to be comforting. But then he noticed something. I can have a perfectly good conversation and still feel like I am performing. I can be admired and somehow not feel known. I can sit across from somebody who is objectively impressive and realise I am still managing myself. Wait, that is the thing, managing himself. Because I think he is very accustomed to being a certain version of himself around people. Competent, interesting, useful. The person with the answer, sir, the person who can handle it. And when people are attracted to him, part of him always knows what they are responding to. His confidence, his position, his stability, whatever he has built around himself. But with you, something became uncomfortable because he could not completely hide behind that. And the Nine of Wands makes so much sense there. Because psychologically, this is somebody standing behind defences that once protected him, suddenly realising the defences are also preventing something. I kept thinking I needed somebody who fit my life, but every time I pictured it, I was still standing outside the relationship somehow. Still observing myself, still doing everything correctly, still being impressive. And I hate admitting this, but with you I stopped noticing whether I was impressive. Okay, that feels significant. Because maybe what he has been trying to replace is not actually you as a person. It is the experience of not having to constantly maintain the version of himself everybody else expects. And you cannot replace that by finding someone with better credentials. You cannot schedule it. You cannot manufacture ease. You cannot decide that silence will feel comfortable because somebody looks right beside you. And I think that is where the replacement test completely backfired. He did not come away thinking, nobody compares to you. It was stranger than that. He came away thinking, why am I comparing how I feel about them to who I was when I was with you? Because somehow, without chasing him, without demanding that he prove anything, without being impressed by all the things that usually give him control, you made him meet the version of himself that exists when none of his status can speak for him. And then the Hierophant comes out. Which is interesting because, symbolically, this card is very structured. Roles, expectations, the way things are supposed to work. And I think that is exactly where he usually feels safest. He knows how to be the provider, the problem solver, the person people trust when something goes wrong. He knows how to create certainty for other people. But with you, certainty was the one thing he could not manufacture. I could make things easier for you. I could solve problems. I could show up with something useful. I could give you reasons to respect me. But none of that guaranteed that you would let me close. And, I think that offended something in him at first. Not because you did anything wrong. More because his usual relationship between effort and outcome stopped making sense. Normally, if he works harder, he gets a result. If he plans better, he reduces risk. If he understands the system, he knows what happens next. But there was no system here. He could be charming and still not know what you were thinking. He could withdraw and discover you were not running after him. He could become logical and somehow still feel everything underneath the logic. So I think he told himself, fine, I will step back. Eventually this will become clear. And then he waited. That was supposed to put him back in control. Except distance did something completely different. It removed all the activity that had been distracting him from what the connection actually represented. Wait, because the Hierophant can also symbolize the identity somebody has learned to inhabit. The respectable identity, the reliable identity, the person who knows the correct answer. And you seem to have touched whatever exists underneath that. Not because you magically saw every part of him. I do not mean that. I mean he could not automatically use competence to produce intimacy with you. That is a very different problem. And maybe that is why he initially experienced this as destabilizing. Because instead of thinking, this person matters to me, he thought, why can I not get myself back to normal? So he kept trying. More space, more logic, more time, more restraint, and every attempt to regain the upper hand gave him another quiet piece of evidence that there was no upper hand to regain, because absence did not make you simpler. It made the role you had been playing in his inner life more obvious. And now I think the fear is changing. Before, it was, what if I cannot forget you? But that is not the thought that makes him go quiet anymore. The thought that makes him go quiet is much worse. What if, while I have been trying this hard to forget you, you have actually been learning how to forget me? And then the Ace of Swords comes out, which, yeah, symbolically, this is clarity, not comfortable clarity. The kind that cuts through an explanation you have been using because the explanation stopped matching reality. And I think the reality he is finally considering is very simple. You may not be waiting. That sounds obvious, but I do not think he emotionally understood it before. I thought distance was something I was choosing. I thought I had time. I thought if this mattered, it would still be there when I was ready to deal with it, and that assumption is starting to collapse. Because while he has been stepping back to think, you may have been doing something completely different. Healing, getting perspective, making plans, having mornings that do not begin with wondering what he means, laughing at something he knows nothing about, building routines where his silence is no longer an event, and, that seems to hit him harder than imagining some dramatic rival, because competition is familiar, competition still lets him participate. If there is another person, he can compare, he can evaluate. He can imagine what he would do differently. But what if there is no competition? What if you simply become unavailable to the pattern? That is different. What if one day I reach for this and discover you are not angry anymore? You are not waiting for an explanation. You are not trying to understand me. You have just moved on. Wait, that feels like the actual fear. Not losing to somebody. Becoming irrelevant. Becoming somebody you once cared about intensely, and now remember without needing anything from him. And the Ace of Swords feels like the moment his question changes. It is no longer, do I really want this? I think he has spent enough time on that question. Now it becomes, have I waited too long? And notice what that does. Suddenly distance is not protection anymore. Time is not neutral anymore. His silence is not preserving the connection in some untouched place while he gets himself together. Time is doing what time does. It is moving. And you are allowed to move with it. I do not want to turn that into. So now he definitely comes running back, because that is not what I am reading symbolically. This feels more internal than that. But something about his imagined future has changed. Before, every scenario involved you somehow still being there, still reachable, still emotionally recognizable to him. Now he is picturing something else. He is picturing meeting you again after you have changed. After he has no automatic access to the version of you who once tolerated uncertainty, and for the first time he is not asking what he would need to say to get you back. He is asking, who would I have to become so I would not lose you the same way twice? And then the Lovers comes out, which, okay. I want to be careful with this card because symbolically the Lovers is not just romance, it is choice. It is what happens when two possibilities cannot both remain open forever. And I think that is where the surrender actually begins. Not with him suddenly becoming desperate. Not with him throwing away his dignity or abandoning everything he has built. It is more uncomfortable than that. He may have to give up the habit of always keeping an exit available. I never wanted to need an answer before I knew what the answer would be. I never wanted to show somebody exactly what I wanted, and then give them the power to say no. So I learned how to stay close enough to feel something, but far enough away that I could still pretend I had options. Wait, that is very specific, because somebody like this can mistake optionality for freedom. If nothing is fully chosen, nothing can fully disappoint him. If he never says exactly what he wants, he can always tell himself he did not really lose it. If he keeps one part of himself outside the situation, then technically he is still in control. Except look at what that strategy cost him here. The distance he created to feel safe became the same distance that made you question whether there was anything solid to trust. And I think he is seeing that now. If I come back still trying to control how much I reveal, if I say just enough to see whether you are receptive, if I leave myself room to deny what I meant if you do not respond the way I want, then I am doing exactly the same thing again. And, that is not surrender to you, that is surrender of the defense. There is a difference. Because maybe he has spent a long time believing that the person who needs less has more power. The person who cares less cannot be hurt as easily. The person who can walk away first wins. But psychologically, the Lovers asks a completely different question. What if winning has been preventing him from choosing? What if emotional safety became a kind of superiority in his mind? I can build something stable. I know how to do that. But building something with another person means I do not get to control every part of the structure. Okay. That feels important, because now commitment is starting to appear here, but not as some dramatic promise or prediction. More like the recognition that real closeness has to be deliberately chosen. Not managed, not kept in reserve. Chosen. And I thought that was the deepest layer of his resistance. But there is one more thing underneath it, one defense he has not admitted yet. And I think it explains why he fought this connection so hard from the beginning. And the Six of Pentacles comes out, which I was not expecting this card here, because symbolically this is exchange, giving, receiving, balance, but I think for him, the uncomfortable part is that real exchange means another person affects the structure. You cannot keep giving from a safe distance forever. I already knew what my life was supposed to look like, where I would be, what I would prioritize, how much of myself belonged to work, how much belonged to other people, what kind of relationship would fit into all of that without disrupting anything. And there is the word, fit. Because I think he has spent years creating something almost architectural around himself, a life where everything has a place. Career here, responsibilities here, private life here. Emotions handled somewhere quietly in the background. And a partner, theoretically, could be added to that. But you did not feel like something he could simply add. I can make room for almost anything without changing the structure. But this would change the structure. Wait. That is the defense. Maybe he was never primarily afraid that you would take away his freedom. Maybe he was afraid that choosing you honestly would force him to reconsider decisions he had already treated as settled. Because there is a big difference between saying, you can join the life I already designed, and saying, if we build something together, then some of these decisions are no longer mine alone. That is much more vulnerable. And the Six of Pentacles makes that really clear, because genuine partnership is not one person standing in a finished castle deciding how much access somebody else gets. It is exchange, influence, adjustment, sometimes giving, sometimes receiving. And I think receiving may actually be harder for him, because receiving means admitting there is something another person can offer that he cannot simply provide for himself. That challenges the whole identity we started with. The person who needs nothing, the person who handles everything. So surrender suddenly has consequences. He would have to choose instead of keeping possibilities open. He would have to speak before knowing your answer. He would have to risk discovering that clarity came too late. And I think this is where all of those scenarios finally run out. Forgetting you did not work. Replacing you did not work. Distance did not work, control did not work, waiting did not work, turning it into something rational did not work. So there is only one scenario left that he has been avoiding because it gives him almost no protection. He stops rehearsing explanations, stops trying to predict your reaction, stops deciding how much truth is safe to reveal. And for the first time, he imagines simply telling you the truth. And then the moon comes out. Which, yeah, that makes sense here. Because symbolically, the moon is what happens when certainty disappears, and you still have to decide whether you are going to be honest. And I think that is exactly what he has been avoiding. Not the feeling, the uncertainty around what happens if he admits it. I kept waiting until I understood everything before I said anything. I thought that was maturity. I thought distance was me being careful. I thought if I gave myself enough time, eventually I would know exactly what this was, exactly what you felt, exactly what the outcome would be. And then I could act. But that moment never came. Because there is no version of this where he gets all the information first. That is the part he hates. I treated not speaking like it was intelligence, like I was being disciplined, but if I am completely honest, some of it was fear. I wanted certainty before vulnerability. I wanted the answer before I asked the question. Wait, this feels very different from where we started, because in the beginning he was still trying to defeat the feeling. Now he is not arguing about whether it exists, he is arguing about what honesty would cost him, and the truth coming through sounds almost frustratingly simple. I miss what existed between us. I know I contributed to the distance. I know I may have waited long enough for you to change your mind about me, and I know wanting another chance does not mean I am entitled to one. That last part matters. Because surrender here is not, I finally admitted this, so now you have to receive me. No, it is more like, I am admitting it even though you may say no, and for someone who has built his identity around competence, that is enormous. Because competence usually creates leverage. Honesty does not. Honesty just tells the truth. I cannot promise myself that you still want this. I cannot promise myself that I have not damaged it. But if I stay silent because I am afraid of hearing the answer, then I already know what I will regret. That is the turning point. Not some dramatic declaration, just the realization that silence has stopped protecting him. Now silence has a price. And the moon fits that perfectly because nothing ahead is completely visible. There is still risk. There is still doubt. There is still the possibility that he misunderstood what remains between you. But internally, he has finally reached the point where pretending not to know what he feels is harder than admitting it. The question now is what happens when a man can finally tell himself the truth, but has not yet become brave enough to live like he believes it. And then the Seven of Pentacles comes out, which is almost painfully appropriate here. Because symbolically this card is about investment, not fantasy, not intention, what you actually put into something over time. And I think that is where this gets very real for him, because understanding himself is not the same thing as changing anything. He can have every realization we have talked about. He can miss you. He can recognize that the future without you feels staged. He can admit that distance was fear dressed up as control. He can even imagine building something real with you, and none of that automatically makes him capable of doing it. I can understand exactly where I went wrong and still repeat it. I can know why I pulled away and still pull away again. I can want something different and still behave like the person who lost it. Okay, that is mature. And uncomfortable. Because now the question is not whether his feelings are strong enough. The question is whether his behaviour can become strong enough to carry them. The Seven of Pentacles is making me think about consistency. What gets tended? What gets neglected? What somebody expects to receive compared to what they actually invested. And you cannot build a relationship out of internal breakthroughs that the other person never experiences. You cannot say, but I realise so much, and expect that realisation to somehow repair silence. There has to be something visible, clarity, consistency, accountability, a willingness to hear your answer without trying to manipulate it. And, this is where I want to bring you back into this, because whatever is happening inside him is his work. You do not have to rescue him from the defences he created. You do not have to reward him, because he finally understands why he behaved the way he did. If he ever comes toward you differently, then differently has to actually mean something. Not a beautiful conversation followed by the same disappearance, not intensity followed by uncertainty, Not another scenario where you are expected to decode what he cannot say directly, and I think he knows that. That is what makes this surrender harder than simply admitting desire, because a powerful person can usually open doors, influence outcomes, create opportunities, but this door is different. He could walk toward it honestly. He could knock, he could tell the truth, he could show you who he is without the armor, and you could still decide not to open it. Wait, that may be the deepest surrender here. Accepting that he can finally do everything right and still not control the result, but whether that door opens or not, there is something he cannot go back to now. Something about the man who built that perfectly self-sufficient life has already changed, and I think the next card is going to show us exactly what. And it is the King of Pentacles. Of course it is, because look at where we started. The Nine of Pentacles reversed. A person whose self-sufficiency had stopped protecting him the way it used to, and now we end with the King. Not somebody who has lost his stability, somebody who has had to redefine what stability actually means. That is different, because I do not think the lesson here is that he suddenly becomes less independent, or less successful, or that everything he built stops mattering. It still matters, the responsibilities are still there, the money, the reputation, the work, the life that looks complete from the outside. But I think he can no longer use any of it as evidence that he should not need anything emotionally. I thought being strong meant nothing could rearrange me. I thought if I was successful enough, disciplined enough, self-contained enough, I would never have to stand in front of another person without leverage, and now I know that is not strength, that is protection. Okay? That is the difference. Because the King of Pentacles, psychologically, does not feel like someone losing control. It feels like someone finally becoming secure enough to stop confusing control with security. He can still stand on his own. He just cannot pretend standing alone is automatically the highest form of strength anymore. And those other futures he imagined? The travelling, the success, the person beside him who looked right, they were not necessarily bad futures. They just kept feeling staged because he was designing them around one requirement: do not risk too much, do not need too much, do not give anyone the ability to hurt you, and that is not really a relationship, that is risk management. So his final thought feels much quieter now. No argument, no elaborate explanation, just, I do not know what you will choose, but I know what I would choose if fear were not making the decision for me. And I think that is where his surrender ends. Not with ownership, not with some guarantee that he gets you, with willingness, the willingness to be known, the willingness to risk an answer, the willingness to build instead of merely offering somebody a place inside a life that was already finished. And for you, that means you do not have to stop your life while he figures out whether he can live according to this realization. That part belongs to him, because he tried distance, he tried logic, he tried replacements, he tried time, he tried keeping every exit open, every scenario worked as long as the goal was to protect his defenses, and every scenario failed at making him forget you. So there is only one left now. He stops trying to defeat what he feels and decides what he is actually willing to do about it.